will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down, but holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3 here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good!
And it's
with
yes,
a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barnes.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And tonight we are diving into the linebackers for the 2024 season for the Tar Heels as we get you prepared. Come down the stretch here. Final 2 position preview editions of the podcast as we close in, believe it or not, 14 days away from the start of Carolina's 2024 season, when they will, of course, be heading up to Minneapolis to take on Minnesota. So we're in the home stretch. We're going to be hitting it hard here over these next 2 weeks. And so we are going to talk about the linebackers tonight, but we got to start by talking about the appearance of head coach Mack Brown on the station that you see in the middle of your screen right below us, Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ. That's where our podcast is based. It's on their podcast feed. And that is also where you will be able to hear the Kyle Bailey Show, 3 to 6 p.m. Each and every weekday. And head coach Mack Brown joined Kyle Bailey yesterday. So we'll go through some of the audio from what he had to say. Some interesting stuff, some great questions, of course, from Kyle, as you would expect with him. So, it'll be very interesting to hear him talk about everything from Amarian Hampton to Caleb Koss, as well as some other things. We kind of left the big picture stuff off the table because there were a few questions about that, which with Mack Brown always kind of makes sense. I mean, he's a guy that was in the media at one time, so he's going to answer some different questions than maybe some of the other coaches in the conference would answer if they came on. But we will start with the one that everybody wants to hear him talking about, and that is the quarterback battle. And look, every time that he talks about this battle, I feel like it's a little bit different. Now, it's relatively consistent to what we heard him say when he spoke to the media as a whole last Sunday. But Kyle asked him, what is the state of the quarterback battle as we sit here today? And this is what he had to say.
Well, Kyle, number one, we're lucky to have 3 that can all play. Some people don't have one. A lot of people have one and then nobody behind them because now, modern day, those guys transfer. So all three of these guys have experience, and they can all play in a game and give us a chance to win. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is you only have so many plays in preseason. So we've been trying to give Max Johnson and Connor Harrell most of the reps with the blue team, the first team, and then let Jacoby, who missed spring and is behind, Jacoby Criswell, who transferred in from Arkansas, get enough to stay in the game, but he is further behind right now. So it's really more of a Connor and Max race at this point, with Jacoby working to be there if something happened or if we needed him, or to be ready to compete for the job more in the spring.
All right. So basically, again, I think this goes back into the theory that I have, which is that this, really since the beginning, I think has been a 2 quarterback race. I think they brought in Jacoby Criswell. Of course, you told him that he was coming in to compete for the job because you want him to come in, and who knows, if he takes you by storm, maybe he picks up the offensive playbook that quickly, then maybe he does end up actually being the starter. But I think what you heard right there feeds into the thought of they will start the season with Max Johnson and Connor Harrell battling it out. I think there's a chance that, look, if Max Johnson wins the job or if Connor Harrell wins it and they struggle in the first half, then they will go to the other quarterback as soon as that second half against Minnesota. But I think Jacoby Criswell is probably that guy that later in the season, if the starter that they go with ends up starting to struggle a little bit, then they probably end up going to Criswell as that option. I mean, what did you take away from what he said there? I think the fact, again, that he thinks this is a 2 quarterback race is a little bit comforting, considering that he is the guy that ultimately it feels like is going to make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's not surprising that, but he was very blunt where it's the first time we've really heard him say straightforward, it's Max and Connor and Criswell, in all honesty, is probably preparing to gear up next year to maybe battle to be the starting quarterback, because he does have another year of eligibility he can use. So we know how important this weekend's going to be. They've got the scrimmage on Saturday. Mack Brown would love to know on Sunday who his starting quarterback is, because at that point you're 10 days out from your season opener at Minnesota. And so I'm along the same lines as you. I think they'll go into that game with the thought process of we're going to play one. Mm-hmm. But if we find ourselves down 17-0, 24-3 at halftime, you probably see the other guy in there, which means that the battle would extend, you would imagine, until the next week in your home opener. So, we don't know who's leading the race, but I do think when we get back on here Sunday night, I do think we'll have an idea of who our starting quarterback will be when we take the field in 14 days.
Yeah, I mean, we could very well have the guy, to be honest with you, because that's honestly when Mack Brown's open. That's what I've heard from him in his press conferences, is that it seems like he wants to have the guy 10 days out to be able to then get that person prepared for what it's going to take to go through a game week, learn everything that they're going to have in their playbook against Minnesota, and learn some of the defensive fronts that they will be seeing against Minnesota, who, by the way, has a new defensive coordinator. So there's a lot of stuff that they have to do differently this time than when they saw them last year in Chapel Hill. So I think that's the thing, is he wants to make sure that whoever it is prepared going in. And so I think it's smart. He has said, I do not want to have 2 quarterbacks. He said that back in 2022, and I think it stands today that he is going to make a decision on a quarterback. It will not be, we are going in with 2 and we're going to split the drives. I can't see it happening. And I think that's comforting for Tar Heel fans. It should be, because that's ultimately what you should be hoping for. Even if it turns out to be the guy that you don't want it to be, at least having some sort of solution. Now, I will say the nightmare scenario that you laid out of being down 24-3, I think at that point, I don't even know if they would really be looking at the quarterback. They would probably be looking more at Jeff Collins and his defense and asking, what the hell is going on? Let's hope that's not the case. And speaking of Jeff Collins, Mack Brown talked about the reasons why Jeff Collins was ultimately the right guy for this position when he was going through and picking his defensive coordinator earlier this offseason.
We interviewed 2 or 3 guys, and in his interview, Kyle, it was really interesting that he, number one, you could tell he wanted the job, and he got offered about 8 jobs. And number 2, he knew every one of our players. He knew all the coaches. He called all the coaches in the Zoom interview by name. He called the players by name. He went through situations like in our bowl game where we were so close, but if this guy had done this better, then you get a stop there and you're doing it. And then he wants to play a lot of people, which we've got to do. We haven't done a good job of playing too deep on defense. And he looks complicated, but he still has a simple enough system that you don't have a lot of mental mistakes. So he was a guy, as I was sitting there listening, that just he checked every box that I could possibly want. Plus, being at Georgia Tech, he recruited the area that we recruit. So he recruited a lot of the players that are on our team and had a relationship with them already, and especially the high school coaches and in the state of North Carolina where he went to school, and in the state of Georgia where he was the head coach.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I mean, the stuff he says at the end with the recruiting, that's something that you like, especially when you've got a defensive line coach in Ted Monachino, that's clearly not his strength. He's been out of the college coaching ranks for so long in terms of being a full-time position coach. So that makes a lot of sense. But you hear from Mack how excited he is about this hire. And you know, I've been asked by multiple people, was asked today on my show when we talked about the Tar Heel defense, why should you be encouraged by the hire of Jeff Collins? And I think one of the simplest reasons is that really, when you compare him to Gene Chizik, he hasn't taken any time off from the sport. That's the reason why Gene Chizik, I think, struggled the way that he did, was because he took time off from the sport. When you hear him talk after the 2012 season or 2022 season, and Gene Chizik tells you that, yeah, there were some things that changed in the game that I didn't realize in my first year back. That was concerning. And then, you know, the other thing, when you compare him to the other defensive coordinator that Carolina had, the thing is that I know even back when he was a defensive coordinator, it's been a while. It's been about 8 years for Jeff Collins. But when he was at Florida, when he was at Mississippi State, they did run fast-paced offenses. When you look back at the hire of Jay Bateman, that was a hire that never really made any sense on paper, because you came from a school where scoring drives were 11 minutes of possession, and you came to a school where a good scoring drive for Carolina was 11 seconds because of how explosive they could be at times. Jeff Collins, I think, is going to be a guy that can handle, he's hoping to build a defense that can handle that. You're seeing it already with the depth. So I think, and maybe this is just the optimist in me, this hire, I think, makes a lot more sense than the other 2 hires did, even though it has been a while since Jeff Collins has been a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, no, I agree. This feels like a hire that, in all honesty, if Mack could have made this hire 5 years ago, this is the type of hire that he would have made. But, you know, Jay Bateman at the time was the young, up-and-coming coordinator in the sport who ran a, you know, unique defense and did a lot of great things at Army. But, you know, we said from the beginning that it was going to be a challenge for him adjusting to Power 5 football. For Gene Chizik, you look at when they brought him in, we put a lot of stock into, well, he did it once, he could do it again, and being able to turn around a bad defense. And in a lot of ways, I mean, he did. I mean, he helped coordinate a defense that got Carolina to an ACC championship game. But you look at both of the last 2 seasons when Carolina fell apart, yes, some of it was offensive driven with offensive line issues and stuff like that. but you were also losing games where you were giving up 40 just about every time you walked on the field.
And winning games. You gave up 45 to a backup quarterback who was in his first career start against Duke. So
yeah, and so I look at Jeff Collins now, and when we went through the process in the offseason, I think he was a guy that we identified as would be a really good hire, one we can get behind. He's energetic as crap. He's going to bring a lot of energy to that side of the ball. There's going to be motivation there because he got fired at Georgia Tech. Despite, you could argue, had the program on the brink of the success they've enjoyed the last couple of seasons, he doesn't get to reap the rewards of that success. I do think for him, and we're not going to talk about this right here, but if he's a big part of Carolina, turning things around defensively and ending Mack Brown 2.0 on a positive note, he'll be in the running to be the next head coach here. And I think that's another reason why he took this opportunity was if I come here and I coordinate a good defense and I help the program stay where it is, maybe advance another step or two before Mack Brown calls it quits, he can have this job. And this job is much easier than Georgia Tech. He would be better suited to have success in Chapel Hill than what he had in Atlanta. So you hear the way that the defensive players talk about him. And I think that's why you can get excited, because as much hype as there was around Jay Bateman, as much familiarity as there was between Gene Chizik and Mack Brown, the players didn't vocalize their belief in that coordinator like they have with Jeff Collins. So now none of this matters if they go out and they give up 40 on Saturdays. But I do think it's okay right now to be optimistic that we're going to play better defense in the falls this season.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the thing is that it's I said it today when I was talking about it. You are in prove it to me mode. Now, is that fair to Jeff Collins? Probably not, but this is the unit that you're inheriting. There's no reason for Tar Heel fans to be overly confident in this unit because there are a lot of the same pieces that are back. But with the new voice, I'm interested to see. The thing that we've heard from a lot of the guys this year is this is a more simple to understand defense. Well, we heard the same thing with Gene Chizik. So that's really making me ask myself, if this is even simpler than Chizik's, how bad was Jay Bateman's system to be able to understand? I mean, it must have been like rocket science at that rate. So I do think one of the things that's also really interesting, and maybe, I don't know, maybe Jay Bateman at one time had thoughts of wanting to become a head coach. Gene Chizik was not becoming a head coach ever again. That was just never in the cards for him. Jeff Collins, whether it's here or if it's somewhere else, the motivation for him is to get back to being a head coach. Yes, he took last year off, but you heard what Max said. He was eyeing up certain spots. He was doing the research that he needed to do. And you would imagine that he was probably doing that for certain spots, preparing to maybe get a head coaching offer. He wants to be a head coach again because you're right. He was, first of all, tasked with one of the most difficult things that we've seen any coach really have to do in the modern era, which is take Georgia Tech from the triple option offense and try to turn them into a spread offense team. And it was hell. He was lucky that he was in the Atlanta area. He did a great job of establishing those relationships and got them to a decent spot. But yeah, ultimately, he's not the guy that's there to see it through, where now they look like they could be a pretty solid contender this year in the ACC. So for him, he probably feels like this is a great opportunity for me here at North Carolina. So I think just that motivation, that might go a long way towards this room succeeding. They need a guy that's coaching them that has a little bit of desperation to him, or a little bit of drive. Where Gene Chizik, I mean, it honestly felt like Gene Chizik, this was his retirement tour and he was just enjoying himself at times. And it's like, dude, that's not what we're here for. So yeah, I like it. Another element that I really like about this team, it probably the element I like the most is Omarion Hampton and what he brings to this backfield. Earlier today, there was a quote that was put out, and I don't know if this was on a recent podcast that they have done or what, but this is from Dalton Wasserman on the PFF College Football Show. He said that Omarion Hampton, quote, he's going to get a buttload of touches, and he might be a dark horse Heisman candidate. I think in the back of our minds, I think some of us have thought this, but because we have said this before with Sam and then we did it with Drake, I think a lot of us are not wanting to put this, out and on the forefront until we actually get into the season and see the Heisman candidacy start to build up. Well, the one thing that it would probably take in order to do that is a lot of carries or just a lot of touches in general from Omarion Hampton, who is trying to improve himself as a receiver. Mack Brown was asked by Kyle yesterday how you manage a guy like Omarion Hampton and try to limit the amount of snaps that he takes with how special of a player he is.
Well, it's really hard because last year, after British Brooks sprained his ankle, every time Larry Porter, our running back coach, wanted to take him out, I'd say, no, he's got a chance to score every time he touches it. But then you try to kill him, so you can't do that either. So I did promise Larry, I probably won't stay strong to my word, but I did promise Larry that if he'll get me another guy so we can rotate, that will really help us. But we've got to make sure that we get Omarion in situations where he can do what he does, because he is one of the best that I've ever coached. He's tough, he's smart, he's durable, he's 220 pounds, he runs 4.4, he can catch and he can block, and he's just the ideal back. If you were going to go recruit one right now, Kyle, he would be the guy you'd look for.
I mean, look, he has said that this is one of the best running backs that he's ever coached. That includes guys like Ricky Williams, Cedric Benson. I mean, just to name a few. I mean, he has had some special dudes that have played running back for him. When it comes to balancing him, I think it's going to look a lot like what it looked like last year. To me, he's too good of a player. Hampton is also a guy, we heard Chip Lindsey say when he spoke to the media last week that Hampton was a guy that would literally try to sneak into drills. They were trying to limit the touches that he had in the preseason. He would try to sneak into drills because he really just wanted to get out there that bad. He loves it that much. So I think it'll look similar, but it's interesting to hear Max say there, we've got to be strategic with how we use him and stuff like that. When you got a guy that could be, one of the best, if not the best running back in the entire country this year.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for him to not touch the ball 30 times a game, but it's not feasible for him to do that and you produce the way that you want / need him to produce. The best thing that Carolina can do to really go towards helping limit him is you look at the 3 straight home games once they get back after the road opener. Like if those games are blowouts where he doesn't have to play in the fourth quarter, maybe you can take him out by the middle of the third, would go a really long way in terms of keeping him fresh, because that once you get to, really that Georgia Tech game, from then on out, because of just the way that the schedule falls, where you got to go to Virginia. We know how tough that game is for Carolina. You got to go to Tallahassee. You play, it feels like instant classics every time with Wake Forest, and you got the 2 road games at the end, that from that point on, you're going to probably need him to tote the ball 25, 28 times every time out. And so if you can limit his touches early on in the season, it could go a long way to where he's not run down by the end of the year. The good news is that he touched the ball a lot last year and he never once got worn down. But you also got to look at the fact that because you had Drake May, you had Tez Walker, there wasn't always 8 guys in the box ready to stop him. That's going to be what he's running up against until Carolina's quarterback play proves that they can't put 8 guys in the box. And so it's going to be harder for him to kind of do what he did throughout the season last year. But look, I think he's the best back in the country. I love Ollie Gordon and what he does in Mike Gundy's offense down in Stillwater, Oklahoma. But I do think that Omarion Hampton is the best running back in college football. And I think you'll see that in more ways than one this season.
Yeah, I mean, look, even against the stacked box, I think that Carolina is going to be a better run blocking team this year. I think that just from looking at the guys that they have, that's going to be the strength. The bigger concern with that offensive line group is pass protection. So, I mean, it sets up for him to have a big year, especially because when you look at what Chip Lindsey's offense is supposed to be based around, it's meant to be a run-first offense. Yep. And last year, when you've got a guy as special as Drake May, he had to adjust his offense. Now, you've got a guy that has played in the SEC. We've heard that 1,000 times so far this offseason. And while he's had some success, he's not a guy that exactly takes over games through the air. The other guy is Connor Harrell, who we saw some things that we really liked. But when you hear Chip Lindsey say what's the thing that he's working on, and his response is accuracy, it means, okay, you probably have to lean on your backfield a little bit more to start the year. That's where I think, especially early in the year, Minnesota might be a game, especially late in the game, where they lean on Hampton to make sure that they find a way to win that game. The next 3 games, and I know James Madison, people want to say it's not an easy game. I'm not saying it's an easy game, but they lost a lot in the offseason. You should be able to beat them. That's where you need to rotate in your other backs. That's where you need to utilize Darwin Barlow, a healthy, hopefully at that time in the season, Caleb Hood, and maybe even get a look at the true freshman Davian Gauss, who's done some really good things out of the gate. That's where you can limit some of the touches on Hampton so that when you get into the games that really matter in conference season, that's when you can lean on your back and say, look, man, this is a night where I need you to give us 35 carries on the ground. And I think that he's more than capable of being able to do that. And the way that he's built, I'm not super concerned that he's a guy that with that amount of hits could, be subject to injury. We saw him take a ton of hits last year. We saw, what was it? At one point last year, Carolina was like 91st in yards before contact on rush attempts. And it just showed you that he was a guy that, he was contacted as much as any running back in the country and still found a way to rip off big gains. So I think he's built for that type of workload. One last thing that I wanted to get to here from Mack Brown talking with Kyle is him talking about Caleb Cost on the defensive side of the ball. And this one's interesting. I don't know how Kyle even really got to this point because Caleb Cost has a pretty deep cut, but he has been doing some really good things. And now that he seems like he's back fully healthy after he hurt himself during the baseball season, he's getting the full reps with the team in fall camp. He is really starting to shine. And here's what Mack Brown had to say about the second-year player who is in line to start at the star position.
To play 2 sports, you got to be a good student, and you've got to be very disciplined and accountable because you have no free time, and you're competing year-round. And he is playing both of those sports at a high level. The baseball coaches are really high on him, so we will keep him through our season, postseason, and then he'll go play baseball, and he'll see us again in the summer. But he's smart, he's athletic, he's tough. He was on a great high school team, so he knows how to compete and win, and we're really excited about him.
I couldn't agree with him more. This was the guy that when we looked back at the bowl game, there was not much to be excited about. This was the one guy that I pointed to and said, he should be a starter next year, no questions asked. And I'm glad that we've gotten to this point. Look, they said the other day, Trey Miller, Ty White, They've done the things. Mack Brown actually said it, that they've done the things to be able to play at some point during this season. That's great. But when you watch the way that Caleb Cost shut down that slot position during that game against a guy in Garrett Green, who I don't think gets enough respect around college football for how good of a quarterback he's developed into, there is a reason to be very excited about what he's going to bring at that star position.
Yeah, and I think you don't see a lot of two-sport athletes at the college level anymore. But we
got two of them on this team this year. Timmy Lawson, the tight end, is a pitcher too.
It's a unique thing, and I think in a lot of ways, man, it benefits them because, like Max said, man, you never cut it off. Like, you're always in this mode of, like, everything is a competition. Everything is all about competing. Because he's playing two sports, his body is probably staying in as good a shape as any player on the roster. Mm-hmm. And because he trains for baseball, I bet his body can do some other things that the other guys that he's competing against just can't do, because his body has to do other things to be able to play baseball at a high level too. So, you're right. We came out of the bowl game, not a whole lot to be pounding our chest about and saying, man, this is what we can count on going into next year. But that was a guy that we identified. And it looks like after he got back with the team after Carolina's run to Omaha on the baseball side of things, that he's picked up right where he left off from that bowl game. And that's a good sign for Carolina. And dare I say, he's poised to be a star at the star position in Jeff Collins' defense.
I knew it was going somewhere either with star or cost. So who knows? I think, honestly, the secondary, and we'll talk about it on Sunday, it's a position on defense, and I know this is scary, a position on defense that you can feel really excited about in terms of its overall standing on the team. It might be one or two in terms of positions that you feel best about going into the season, which is unbelievable to say. One of the positions that I don't necessarily think is towards the top of that list is linebacker. And that's what we're previewing here tonight as we transition to our position previews here on the podcast side of things. And you go to the linebacker spot, and first of all, you can't talk about this position without talking about the fact that Cedric Gray isn't here anymore. That's a huge loss. Truly one of the best linebackers that Carolina has had in a long time. Just the versatility, the amount of plays that he made week in and week out for Carolina. Such a very accomplished guy in coverage. And now with him gone to the NFL, unfortunately not healthy right now, so they can't see him in the preseason, but hopefully he will be able to return and play some in the regular season for the Tennessee Titans. Now, the thing is that Power Echols has to step up and become the leader of that group. The good news is that for the most part, Power Echols is a really, really solid linebacker. And I think that he is going to be able to step his game up even to the next level and become the leader of this group. That we haven't heard any worries about that. He still seems he's very similar to Cedric Gray. If you talk to these guys off the field, you would say, these guys seem a little quiet. But when you actually see them on the field, when you watch some of the mic'd up stuff and you watch them, he is clearly vocal on the football field. That's where he shines as a leader. And I think, you look at the mindset that he plays with, he's very aggressive. I think one thing that he's got to be better at this year is he's got to be more sure-handed tackling wise, because we just don't know if Amari Campbell is as good next to him as Cedric Gray was in terms of being able to consistently wrap up and tackle. And with the defensive line still a question mark, as a linebacker, that's something you have to do in this system. I like what he brings as a coverage guy. I think he, may have to become even a little better because he's going to be the primary guy dropping this year. But there is a lot of reasons to be confident that Power Echols is the guy that you want leading your defense going into this season.
Yeah, look, we knew when he committed he was going to be a big time linebacker, and I think so far he's lived up to that, and he's poised to have a really special season this year. And if Carolina improves up front like we hope they do, I think you're really going to see what he's capable of doing, because he's put up some big numbers. He's been a productive player, and that's generally with his defensive line getting blocked into him more often than not.
Yep.
If that quits happening, I think you'll see the instincts and the ability to find the ball and make plays at or behind the line of scrimmage really shine through in a big way. And if that happens, it'll transform this defense in more ways than one. So, look, I love him. He's probably right there with Kamen Rucker and Marcus Allen as one of my favorite players on the defensive side of the football. I think he's going to have a special season. And I think that you'll notice that Ced Gray isn't gone, but that is gone. But I do think that he'll fill the leadership void, and he'll be a guy that Carolina counts on week in, week out to make big time plays out of that linebacker spot.
Yeah, and alongside of him is going to be Amari Campbell, a guy that he has been very complimentary of when he sat down with me, and then when he talked to the Wesson Walker show the other day. They brought him up, and again, he continued to rave about him. Now, the thing with Amari is that he is dealing with a broken hand right now. Tommy Thigpen, the team's linebacker coach, spoke earlier today, and his comments were not exactly one of confidence. He said that he will, quote, be out a couple of weeks. Well, if you look at that, that lines up with exactly 2 weeks from now being the first game of the season. And when asked, would he be ready to go for the Minnesota game, Tommy Thigpen simply replied, I hope so. So initially it was thought that he wouldn't miss any games. But now, I mean, when you hear that, that doesn't necessarily sound good. The other thing that you have to worry about in that opener is if this is how they're looking at it, and if he's not going to practice at all going in, that means that you would expect that hand is going to be fully clubbed. That makes it a lot more difficult to grab on and tackle. It makes it almost impossible for you to drop him into coverage, which he won't do a lot of anyways. He's a guy that's a downhill linebacker. You saw that last year when he was in the game. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him. What sucks is that we saw him in the bowl game, and I really think that he's a guy that fits in perfectly with what Carolina wants to do. The fact that he came in and really lit it up as quickly as he did last year, and Mack Brown was raving about him, I think probably had everybody feeling pretty good when they knew he would be the guy that would slide in next to Power. Again, there were some times where he did miss some tackles. That's something that I think as a group, Carolina's got to get cleaned up. But this is another guy that I think really you look at the success that Carolina has had at the linebacker position under Mack Brown. I feel like it will continue with Amari Campbell coming in there.
Yeah, no, the talent and the ability jumps off the screen when he's on the field and he's healthy. His ability to play downhill. That's why you really hope the defensive line takes that step that we've talked so much about, because you'll really see what he's capable of doing, in terms of being at or behind the line of scrimmage, just being around the ball and making plays. And so if he's not ready to go week one fully, it'll suck, because it feels like, you would really like to have him as close to 100% as possible. To give your new defense a chance to hold up its end of the bargain on the road against a Power 5 opponent. But the good news is that once he's in there, Carolina will have, once again, one of the better duos at the linebacker spot in the conference, and one that could fly under the radar nationally as one of the better duos in the country. So it sucks he got hurt in camp, but this is why we stress the importance of depth, because stuff like this is going to happen. But once he's back, he'll be making plays out there and being a big part of whatever this defense looks like in 2024.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you would love to have the depth behind him, and yet again, you still don't. this has been the issue for Carolina really since they made the move to put Cedric Gray into the starting lineup over Eugene Asante. That was the last season that Carolina really had legitimate depth at the linebacker position. And once again, in a year where you are hoping we can find ways to limit the amount of reps that guys have throughout the season so that they are fresher down the stretch, you're looking at a scenario where more than likely the best thing for Carolina to do to have the most success, especially stopping the run, but just in general as a defense, is going to be playing your starting linebackers almost every single snap. Now, look, this injury, hopefully it will force somebody to step up and prove that they are actually capable of playing starter-like reps, but there's no telling at this point if that's actually going to happen. Right now, there's 5 guys that are battling for what, at this point, should be seen as starter in the first game of the season. That's what they should be billing it as to these guys. You're playing with the first team, and right now we don't know if we're going to have Amari Campbell for that first game. So you guys need to be preparing like that. But eventually it would turn into the primary rotational role once Campbell is back healthy. The guys that, you look at, I think second-year guys, sophomore Michael Short and redshirt freshman Caleb Lavallee, those were the names that we heard the most about heading into fall camp coming out of the spring. They have the most experience in the system, and they're probably the most talented of those second-year guys. Cade Law, who is a walk-on, that's the brother of true freshman Cruz Law, who is also involved in this battle right now. But Cade is a guy that looked really good in the spring game. He's also been around for 2 years. But again, he's a guy that just started playing football again last year. And prior to that, he was a guy that played quarterback, not linebacker, when he played high school football. So he's an interesting candidate for sure. And then there's a guy that I really like. I just don't know if he is ready to be a starter or be the main rotational guy early in the season. And that's Ashton Woods, the true freshman. He did some really good things in the spring. Unfortunately, he got hurt, wasn't able to play in the spring game. Would have loved to see him out there. But I think if there's a true freshman that can make an impact, it's probably going to be him. Now, when Tommy Thigpen was asked about this group earlier today, he didn't give a ton, but he did say the first group, the first 2 guys that he did mention were Caleb Lavallee and Cade Law, who have apparently put together some promising performances so far here in the fall. That would, in my mind, if he's saying those guys first, I would think that's probably the guys that he's looking at. But, Michael Short, Ashton Woods are certainly guys that are still hanging around. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody steps up. I want to hear more about this foursome or five-some. I don't even know if that's a real thing. When we hear from Mack Brown, whether it's following Saturday's scrimmage or if it's on Sunday morning, because I'm hoping that from that group, somebody is able to stand out.
Yeah, you need them to, because we don't know what Amari Campbell situation looks like for the opener. Again, though, when you look at building depth, you can do it in training camp, in preseason. The best way to do it's in the season. And so even if you don't have that guy ready to go by week 1, that's where the next 3 games at home, man, if you can put some separation between you and the opponent, you can get these guys some snaps and further develop them. That's been the biggest reason why they haven't been able to develop anybody, is because how many games have they played where the game was in doubt, where you were taking your starters out early enough to get these guys valuable snaps? Hadn't happened. I mean, there would be some one-off games where, Carol, Syracuse last year, and some others, but outside of that, there were games that we would look at and say, this game should be over middle of the third quarter, and we're in a 1-possession ball game. Well, when those guys aren't playing, like, yeah, you can get better in practice, but you get better by playing and then having legitimate film that you can be evaluated and get critiqued upon. So it might be a committee approach for the opener. Could be a situation where you see Carolina play with one linebacker and a plethora of defensive backs if they feel more comfortable doing that. But the best way to build adequate depth is to be able to get these guys on the field in game action. And you'll have a 3-game stretch after the opener to do that. And maybe you find someone that emerges that you're more confident in, because Carolina has to rotate Eccles and Campbell even throughout the season. You look at Eccles and Gray the last couple years, it felt like, especially Eccles, the way we got deeper into the year, the more that they just got worn down.
Yep.
And so if you can build that depth and be able to rotate these guys and keep them more fresh for the stretch run, it can maybe keep Carolina from falling apart defensively in the second half of the season once again. So, but the work's cut out for them. Mack Brown sounded somewhat encouraged on Sunday when he last spoke with the media about this position, but none of that matters if we get onto the field and none of these guys can't play.
Yeah, look, you're right that getting on the field is probably the best teacher for a lot of the guys. The thing that you just wish is last year, we all remember it, the way that they talked about Amari Campbell and how he had really stepped up. They were seeing the signs of a guy that was ready to play. We just don't really hear that about these guys. And that doesn't mean that these guys are never going to be good, but it just means that right now they're not at the level where you feel confident going into a game. Okay, they're going to go out there. They're going to contribute the way that we need them to. That the other thing is that, look, it wouldn't be so bad if we knew what we were going to get from this defensive line. The fact that you just don't know that there could be a ton of responsibility on the linebacker position again this year, that's what really sucks and what is going to make it incredibly difficult for you to ease guys in at this position. That's where, starting with Minnesota, I think in some respects is good for this team because it's going to get them locked in right out of the gate. In other respects, such as this position with the Campbell injury, you kind of wish that this was a game that was played a little bit later in the non-conference schedule. So, yeah, we'll see. But again, I think Saturday is going to be important. I think this week of practice, maybe there are some guys like LaValle and Cade Law who are standing out. Now we need to see it extend into Saturday and really hear from Mack Brown. One of those guys or even both of those guys have shown me that they are ready to play, and we feel pretty good about putting them out there. The thing that you said about multiple members of the secondary, I will say, remember how much Mack Brown has been raving about the safety position where they have 4 guys that he feels like can play. I would not doubt it you look at how good DeAndre Boykins was as a tackler. Could you see him out there playing some hybrid linebacker safety type of role in that first game of the season or however long they actually need him to? That could be something interesting to watch moving forward. The rest of the group, guys that you probably won't see a lot, fellow true freshman Evan Bennett, probably eyeing up a redshirt season. Again, we heard Ashton Woods and Cruz Law, both of those guys were named as part of the battle, either today by Tommy Thigpen or by Mack Brown back on Sunday. Evan Bennett's name has not come up, but look, it makes sense. He was a summer enrollee. I don't think it's something to be panicked about. And then you look at the walk-ons, it's CJ Murphy and Gibson McCray, guys that have been there for a while and are members of the special teams. So they should be in those roles once again this season. So there's your look at the linebacker position. And that's going to close it down for this evening's edition of the, I almost called it the Four Corners podcast, the Heel Tough Blog podcast. The thing is, go check out that Four Corners podcast, same place that you get this podcast. It was video last night as well, if you want to go back and watch it. We broke down Tejon Claude's commitment to Carolina So yeah, make sure you go back, check that out. And meanwhile, on the website, you can also check out basketball side of things, the article on Claude and the impact that he could have at Carolina. There's also a 5-star shooting guard that is closing in on his decision. Find out if Carolina is still alive for him and if they are in position to land that commitment later on this month. Meanwhile, on the football side of things, over on the website, again, those position previews are up. We encourage you guys, check out the defensive backs and special teams for the next edition of the podcast. We will talk about both of those units, a lot on the defensive backs, a little on the special teams, but that'll get you familiar with everybody that is in that room, that respective room. So make sure that you guys are reading that. And of course, any news and notes that are coming out from around practice, we are keeping you up to date on that. Whenever the coordinators speak or Mack Brown speaks, we are putting up articles. So make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that. We, of course, have the article up there about Amari Campbell. If you want to read a little bit more about that injury, I will update that tonight with what was said from Tommy Thigpen. So be on the lookout for that. All of that stuff there on the website. Again, HeelToughBlog.com podcast. We will continue rolling along. Again, we have the breakout players as well as the bold predictions podcast that'll be coming your way. Those will be articles on the website here as well. So there is plenty that is coming up. And then, of course, the week of the game against Minnesota, we will have everything that you need, a preview that Wednesday night, and then we will recap the game on Friday night. So any coverage that you guys need, you can check it out, Heel Tough Blog podcast, and that is also on the website as well. The best thing to do, guys, whenever you wake up in the morning so that you can get your latest Tar Heel news and Tar Heel opinions, just head to the Heel Tough Blog website and check it out. But once again, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.